When veteran farmer Jake Thompson discovered two tiny cubs hidden in his Iowa cornfield, he never imagined their DNA would rewrite what scientists thought they knew about big cat genetics. What started as a routine morning check on his livestock would become one of the most extraordinary wildlife discoveries in North American history. The September dawn broke crisp and clear over Thompson's 800-acre farm in rural Cedar County, Iowa. At 58 years old, Jake had been working this land for over 3 decades, inheriting it from his father, who had carved out a living from the rich prairie soil since the 1960s. Rolling hills dotted with oak groves and bisected by honey. Creek had seen generations of corn, soybeans, and cattle, but nothing had prepared Jake for what he would find that Tuesday morning. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Jake's daily routine never varied. Up at 5:30 a.m., black coffee, quick breakfast, then out to check the cattle in the far pasture before the sun climbed too high. His border collie Rex bounded ahead as always, nose to the ground, tail wagging with the enthusiasm of a dog who never tired of farm life. The morning air carried the scent of ripening corn and the distant sound of geese heading south for winter. As they approached the northeastern corner of his property, where the cornfield met a dense grove of mature oaks, Rex suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. His ears perked forward, body rigid with attention. Jake had seen this behavior before when Rex detected raccoons or possums, but something felt different. The dog's hackles were raised, and a low whine escaped his throat. "What is it, boy?" Jake murmured, following Rex's intense gaze toward a fallen oak tree that had toppled during a severe thunderstorm 3 weeks earlier. The massive trunk created a natural shelter, its roots forming a cave-like depression filled with dead leaves and debris. Rex approached cautiously, then backed away, whimpering. That's when Jake heard it, a sound that made his blood run cold. Not the chittering of raccoons or the hiss of an opossum, but something much more powerful. A deep, guttural growling that seemed far too large for any animal that should exist on an Iowa farm. Jake's first instinct was to retreat. 40 years of farming had taught him to respect the unexpected, especially when it involved unknown animals. But curiosity and concern for his livestock drove him forward. He grabbed a sturdy oak branch from the ground, his heart hammering as he approached the fallen tree. The growling intensified, followed by what sounded like mewing, but not from any house cat. These were deep, resonant calls that vibrated through the morning air. Jake positioned himself carefully, using the branch to push aside some of the debris, blocking his view into the root cave. What he saw defied every expectation he'd built over nearly 6 decades of life. 2 cubs, roughly the size of small dogs, huddled together in the darkest corner of the makeshift den. But these weren't ordinary cubs. Jake's farming experience had exposed him to plenty of wildlife: coyotes, foxes, even the occasional mountain lion sighting reported by neighbors. But he'd never seen anything like these creatures. The first cub displayed the unmistakable spotted pattern of a leopard, with rosettes covering its golden coat. Its ears were rounded, its build compact and muscular, even at this young age. But the second cub was entirely different. Solid tawny coloring with darker ears and a longer tail, resembling what Jake thought might be a mountain lion cub, though he'd never seen one up close. Both cubs appeared to be roughly 8 to 10 weeks old, their eyes fully open and alert, teeth visible as they bared them defensively. They were clearly terrified, pressed against each other for comfort, but their fear was mixed with a wild defiance that spoke of creatures born for survival. Jake's mind raced. Leopards didn't exist in Iowa. Mountain lions were rare enough, with only occasional unconfirmed sightings. But 2 different species of big cat cubs, apparently siblings, hidden in his cornfield. It was impossible, yet undeniably real. The cub's condition told a story of recent trauma. Their fur was matted with mud and dried blood from small scratches. The spotted cub favored its left front paw, holding it slightly off the ground. Both animals were clearly undernourished, their ribs visible beneath their coats, suggesting they'd been without adequate food for several days. More disturbing was the complete absence of any adult cats. These cubs were far too young to survive on their own. Whatever had happened to bring them to his farm, they were now orphaned and vulnerable in an environment completely unsuited to their needs. Jake backed away slowly, his mind spinning with questions. How had exotic big cats ended up on his farm? Were they escaped zoo animals? Illegal pets abandoned by irresponsible owners? The nearest zoo was over 200 miles away in Des Moines, and Jake couldn't recall any news reports about escaped big cats. As he retreated, Jake noticed other signs he'd missed in his initial shock. Tracks in the soft earth near the fallen tree, paw prints far too large to belong to the cubs, suggesting an adult big cat had been present recently. Scratch marks on nearby trees, gouged too high and too deep for any local wildlife. And most unsettling, the complete absence of smaller animals in the immediate area. The usual chorus of birds and chattering squirrels was eerily silent. Jake's practical farmer's mind immediately grasped the dangerous implications. If these cubs had parents nearby, his cattle were at risk. His neighbor's livestock could be threatened. Small children in the rural community could be in danger. But looking back at the terrified, hungry cubs, he also understood they were victims of circumstances beyond their control. Standing in his cornfield with the morning sun climbing higher, Jake Thompson faced a decision that would change not only his life but potentially rewrite scientific understanding of big cat genetics in North America. The cubs' unusual pairing would soon capture the attention of wildlife experts, geneticists, and researchers from across the continent. But in that moment, all Jake saw were two frightened, hungry babies who needed help to survive. Jake's hands shook as he pulled out his cell phone, the morning breeze carrying the cubs' distressed calls across his cornfield. His first instinct was to call 911, but what would he even say? "I found two big cat cubs that shouldn't exist in Iowa." They'd think he'd lost his mind or had too much whiskey the night before. Instead, he scrolled through his contacts until he found Dr. Sarah Chun, the large animal veterinarian who'd been treating his cattle for the past 15 years. Sarah had seen everything during her career: exotic birds that escaped from private collections, illegal reptiles abandoned in barns, even a tiger cub someone had tried to raise as a pet before authorities intervened. If anyone would believe him and know what to do, it would be Sarah. Sarah, it's Jake Thompson. I need you to come out to my farm immediately. I found something you're not going to believe. Jake, what's wrong? Is it the cattle? You sound shaken. Not the cattle. I found two big cat cubs in my north pasture. Cubs, Sarah. One looks like a leopard, the other like a mountain lion. They're maybe 10 weeks old, scared, hungry, and completely alone. The silence on the other end stretched so long Jake wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Sarah's voice came back, carefully controlled. Jake, I'm going to pretend I didn't hear leopard and mountain lion in the same sentence about Iowa, but if you found cubs of any kind in distress, I'll be there in 40 minutes. Don't approach them again until I arrive. While waiting for Sarah, Jake's mind raced through possible explanations. 20 miles north, the Hendersons ran a small exotic animal sanctuary, though he'd heard they'd fallen on hard times recently. Maybe these cubs had escaped from there. Or perhaps someone had been keeping illegal big cats and dumped them when they became too difficult to handle. The more Jake thought about it, the angrier he became. Whoever was responsible for putting these vulnerable animals in this situation had committed an act of profound cruelty. Cubs this young should be with their mothers, learning to hunt and survive. Instead, they were terrified and starving in an Iowa cornfield. Rex had refused to leave the area, lying down about 50 feet from the fallen oak tree, watching and whimpering occasionally. Even Jake's experienced farm dog seemed to understand these weren't ordinary animals, requiring ordinary responses. Dr. Sarah Chun arrived in her modified pickup truck equipped with veterinary supplies, portable X-ray equipment, and emergency medications. At 42, Sarah had built a reputation as one of Iowa's most capable large animal vets, but even she paused when Jake led her to the makeshift den. "Jesus Christ, Jake," she whispered, crouching down to peer into the root cave. "You weren't exaggerating." Sarah immediately noticed details Jake had missed. The spotted cub's injured paw showed signs of infection, with slight swelling around what appeared to be a puncture wound. Both cubs displayed signs of severe dehydration, sunken eyes, dry gums visible when they snarled defensively. Most concerning was their obvious terror of human presence, suggesting they'd experienced trauma involving people. "We need to get them secured and transported immediately," Sarah said, returning to her truck for specialized equipment. "They're in critical condition, and exposure to Iowa's cooling September nights could kill them within days." Sarah had dealt with exotic rescues before, but never anything this complex. She contacted her colleague Dr. Marcus Webb at the University of Iowa's Veterinary School, explaining the situation and requesting emergency support. Marcus, a specialist in wildlife medicine, agreed to meet them at Sarah's clinic with additional equipment and medication specific to big cats. The capture process required extreme caution. Sarah used a modified trap designed for medium-sized wildlife, baiting it with fresh chicken she'd brought as an emergency food source. The cubs' hunger eventually overcame their fear, and within an hour, both were safely contained in separate transport carriers. During the drive to Sarah's clinic, the cubs' behavior revealed more about their tragic situation. The spotted cub, despite its injury, repeatedly tried to position itself between its companion and any perceived threat. The tawny cub, smaller and seemingly younger, made continuous distress calls that the spotted cub answered with low, comforting growls. "They're bonded," Sarah observed, glancing back at the carriers. "These aren't just two random cubs. They've been together since birth or very early in life. That's going to complicate everything." At the clinic, Dr. Webb was waiting with specialized equipment borrowed from the nearby Blank Park Zoo. His examination revealed the cubs' condition was worse than initially apparent. Both showed signs of chronic malnutrition extending back weeks, not days. The spotted cub's infected paw contained what appeared to be pellet gun fragments. Most shocking was the discovery of old needle marks on both cubs' necks, suggesting they'd been repeatedly sedated. "Someone's been keeping these animals captive for months," Webb concluded grimly. "The needle marks, the malnutrition, the fear. Response: this points to prolonged captivity under terrible conditions." Blood samples taken for basic health screening would later reveal something that stunned the veterinary team. Initial genetic markers suggested these cubs weren't just two different species found together by coincidence. Preliminary tests indicated they might actually be related, sharing genetic material in ways that challenged conventional understanding of big cat species barriers. Webb immediately contacted Dr. Jennifer Martinez at the National Wildlife Genetic Research Laboratory in Colorado. Martinez, one of the country's leading experts in big cat genetics, agreed to fast-track DNA analysis on the samples. "If these results are accurate," Martinez told Webb during their phone consultation, "we're looking at something unprecedented. Hybrid big cats are extremely rare in captivity and virtually unknown in wild populations. But the genetic markers you're describing suggest these cubs represent something science hasn't documented before." Meanwhile, Jake found himself thrust into a world he'd never imagined. His simple farm had become ground zero for what might be a major scientific discovery. Fish and Wildlife Service agents arrived to investigate possible violations of federal exotic animal laws. Local news crews began gathering at his front gate after word leaked through police scanner traffic, but Jake's focus remained on the cubs themselves. During his daily visits to Sarah's clinic, he watched their gradual recovery with the same careful attention he'd given to orphaned calves over the years. The spotted cub, whom Sarah had nicknamed Leo, showed remarkable resilience despite his injuries. The tawny cub, called Luna for her pale coloring, remained more fragile but displayed in fierce determination to survive. As the cubs stabilized physically, their behavior revealed intelligence and emotional complexity that amazed their caregivers. They communicated with subtle vocalizations, shared food even when hungry, and showed genuine distress when separated for medical procedures. Dr. Martinez's preliminary genetic results arrived 5 days after the cub's rescue, delivered via urgent phone call that would change everything they thought they knew about big cat evolution and genetics. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The phone call from Dr. Martinez came at 7:23 a.m. on a rainy Thursday morning while Jake was having coffee with Sarah at her clinic. Sarah's face went pale as she listened to the geneticist's findings, scribbling notes with trembling hands. "That's impossible," Sarah whispered into the phone. "Run the tests again. Yes, I understand the implications, but are you absolutely certain?" Jake watched Sarah's expression shift from disbelief to amazement, to something approaching awe. When she finally hung up, she sat in stunned silence for nearly a minute before speaking. "Jake, those cubs aren't just siblings. There's something that shouldn't exist according to everything we know about big cat genetics. Leo is a leopard-jaguar hybrid, and Luna is a mountain lion-jaguar hybrid. But here's the part that's going to revolutionize feline genetics. They share the same jaguar mother." The revelation hit Jake like a physical blow. A single female jaguar had mated with both a leopard and a mountain lion, producing cubs that represented unprecedented genetic combinations. Dr. Martinez explained that while big cat hybrids occasionally occurred in captivity, a triple species genetic combination had never been documented. The scientific community would be in uproar. More disturbing was what this discovery implied about their origin. Jaguars hadn't roamed Iowa for over a century. Someone had been operating an illegal breeding facility, forcing these magnificent creatures into unnatural situations for unknown purposes. The needle marks on the cubs suddenly made terrible sense. Someone had been conducting experiments. Federal authorities descended on Cedar County within hours of the genetic confirmation. Agent Patricia Valdez from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service established a command center at Jake's farmhouse, coordinating with the FBI's Wildlife Trafficking Division and Interpol's Environmental Crime Unit. The cubs' unique genetics suggested connections to international exotic animal smuggling networks worth millions of dollars. "Mr. Thompson, we believe your farm was chosen as a dumping ground because of its remote location and proximity to major transportation corridors," Agent Valdez explained. "Someone wanted these cubs found, but not immediately. They were buying time to cover their tracks." The investigation revealed disturbing patterns. 3 other farms within a 100-mile radius had reported unusual animal sightings in recent months. Large cats glimpsed at dawn, strange tracks near livestock, unexplained sounds in the night. All the locations shared characteristics with Jake's farm, isolated, near major highways, owned by farmers known for caring about animal welfare. Dr. Webb's continued medical examinations uncovered more evidence of the cubs' traumatic past. Both showed signs of chronic stress, elevated cortisol levels, abnormal sleep patterns, hypervigilance to human presence. Leo's infected paw had been caused by a tracking chip forcibly removed before abandonment. Luna displayed behavioral markers consistent with early separation from her mother, suggesting she'd been hand-raised by humans before being reunited with Leo. Despite the horrific circumstances of their early lives, both cubs showed remarkable resilience during recovery. Leo's natural leadership instincts emerged as his physical condition improved. He appointed himself Luna's protector, positioning himself between her and any perceived threats. His play behavior revealed the intelligence and adaptability that made leopards such successful predators, but tempered with an unusual gentleness toward his smaller companion. Luna, initially the more fragile of the two, displayed an extraordinary capacity for emotional healing. Her mountain lion genetics expressed themselves in remarkable jumping ability and silent movement, but her jaguar heritage showed in her powerful jaw strength and swimming behavior. She was the only big cat Dr. Webb had ever observed who actually enjoyed bath time during medical treatments. The cubs' bond deepened during their recovery, developing communication patterns that fascinated animal behaviorists Dr. Webb consulted. They used distinct vocalizations for different situations, soft chuffs for comfort, sharp barks for alarm, complex purring harmonies during rest periods. When separated for individual medical procedures, both showed signs of genuine distress. That went beyond normal feline anxiety. Jake found himself emotionally invested in ways that surprised him. A practical farmer who'd always maintained appropriate emotional distance from livestock, he discovered these cubs had awakened protective instincts he didn't know he possessed. He spent hours at the clinic, reading aloud to them the same way he'd once read bedtime stories to his own children decades ago. Sarah noticed the cubs responded differently to Jake than to other humans. While they remained wary of strangers, they showed signs of recognition and even limited trust toward the farmer who'd found them. Leo would approach the front of his enclosure when Jake arrived, and Luna often fell asleep during his reading sessions. As the cubs' physical recovery progressed, the question of their permanent placement became increasingly complex. Traditional wildlife sanctuaries weren't equipped to handle animals with such unique genetic profiles. Zoos expressed interest, but Dr. Martinez argued that the cubs represented irreplaceable genetic diversity that needed specialized preservation. Protocols. The breakthrough came when Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne, director of the International Center for Big Cat Conservation in Montana, offered to create a specialized facility specifically for Leo and Luna. Hawthorne had spent her career studying big cat genetics and recognized the cubs' unprecedented scientific value. These cubs represent a genetic combination that may never occur again, Hawthorne explained during a video conference with Jake, Sarah, and the federal agents. They're not just animals. They're living laboratories that could unlock secrets about feline evolution, hybrid vigor, and species adaptation. But they're also individuals who deserve lives as close to natural as possible, given their circumstances. Hawthorne's proposed facility would span 50 acres of Montana wilderness, enclosed but large enough to allow natural behaviors. The cubs would have access to streams, varied terrain, and sophisticated enrichment programs. Most importantly, they would remain together, honoring the bond that had sustained them. Through their traumatic early months, Jake struggled with mixed emotions about the cubs' future placement. Logic told him Montana was the right choice. Leo and Luna needed specialized care he couldn't provide on an Iowa farm. But his heart had become invested in their welfare in ways that surprised him. The decision was made when Luna suffered a minor medical setback, developing respiratory symptoms that required immediate intervention. During her treatment, Leo's distress was so severe he refused to eat for 3 days, losing dangerous amounts of weight. The incident convinced everyone that the cubs' emotional bond was as critical to their survival as their physical health. Hawthorne accelerated construction of the Montana facility, understanding that time was crucial for the cubs' psychological development. 2 years later, Jake Thompson stood at the observation deck of the Hawthorne Big Cat Conservation Center, watching Leo and Luna explore their expansive Montana home. The spotted leopard-jaguar hybrid had grown into a magnificent 180-pound male, his rosettes now deep and distinct against his golden coat. Luna, the mountain lion-jaguar hybrid, moved with ethereal grace through the tall grass, her tawny form barely disturbing the wildflowers as she stalked an enrichment toy. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The terrified, malnourished cubs Jake had discovered in his cornfield had become confident, healthy adults whose very existence had revolutionized scientific understanding of big cat genetics. Dr. Martinez's continued research with their DNA had led to groundbreaking discoveries about hybrid vigor, species adaptation, and the evolutionary flexibility of the Panthera genus. They're remarkable, aren't they? Dr. Hawthorne joined Jake at the viewing platform, her eyes bright with scientific fascination and genuine affection for the cats. Leo's hunting techniques blend leopard stealth with jaguar power in ways we've never documented. And Luna, she can leap 12 feet vertically, swim like her jaguar ancestors, and move with mountain lion silence. They're living proof that nature's boundaries are more fluid than we ever imagined. The federal investigation had eventually traced the cubs' origins to an international exotic breeding ring operating across 3 countries. The criminals had been using remote locations like Jake's farm as temporary dumping grounds while authorities closed in on their primary facilities. 8 arrests were made, including a rogue geneticist who had been conducting illegal hybridization experiments for wealthy collectors willing to pay millions for genetically unique animals. But the cubs' rescue had triggered something far more significant than a criminal investigation. The publicity surrounding Leo and Luna had sparked a global conversation about wildlife trafficking, exotic animal ownership, and the responsibility of developed nations to protect endangered species. Jake found himself testifying before Congress about the need for stronger penalties for wildlife crimes. More surprisingly, Jake had become an unlikely advocate for conservation education. His simple, straightforward account of finding the cubs had resonated with people worldwide, humanizing complex conservation issues through the story of 2 vulnerable animals and the farmer who refused to abandon them. The Hawthorne Center had established the Thompson Wildlife Discovery Program, bringing school groups to learn about genetics, conservation, and the importance of protecting natural habitats. Jake often spoke to these groups, sharing his story with the same practical honesty that had made him a respected voice in his community. "I was just a corn farmer who found something unusual in his field," Jake would tell the wide-eyed students. But sometimes ordinary people get extraordinary opportunities to make a difference. The question isn't whether you're qualified to help, it's whether you're willing to try. Leo and Luna had become ambassadors for their species, their story, documented in scientific journals, nature documentaries, and conservation campaigns. Their unique genetics had provided researchers with unprecedented insights into big cat evolution, leading to new strategies for protecting endangered felines worldwide. Dr. Sarah Shun had parlayed her experience with the cubs into a specialized practice in exotic animal medicine. She now consulted with wildlife facilities across North America, training veterinarians to handle genetic conservation cases. The network she'd helped establish had already prevented the extinction of 2 critically endangered subspecies through carefully managed breeding programs. The cubs' bond remained as strong as ever. They hunted together, played together, and shared the massive trees Jake had donated from his own property, oak saplings that now provided shade and climbing opportunities in their Montana home. Their communication patterns had evolved into a sophisticated system that researchers were still documenting, contributing to understanding of interspecies social development. During Jake's quarterly visits to Montana, he still read to them. Now the books were advanced texts on genetics and conservation biology, though he suspected Leo and Luna enjoyed his voice more than the content. They would approach the fence. When he arrived, Leo's deep chuff of greeting echoing across the enclosure while Luna performed her signature vertical leap, a joyful display that never failed to make Jake smile. The ripple effects of that September morning continued expanding. The International Union for Conservation of Nature had established new protocols for handling genetic anomalies in wild populations. Universities worldwide offered courses on hybrid genetics and conservation implications. Most importantly, public awareness of wildlife trafficking had increased dramatically, leading to stronger enforcement and reduced demand for exotic animals. Jake's farm had become a pilgrimage site for conservation enthusiasts, though he limited visits to protect his privacy and continue his agricultural work. A small monument near the site where he'd found the cubs commemorated the discovery, but Jake insisted the focus remain on the animals, not on him. "They taught me that extraordinary things can happen anywhere," Jake reflected, watching Luna demonstrate her swimming abilities in the center's large pond. These cubs changed how the world thinks about genetics, about conservation, about the responsibility we all share for protecting wildlife. They turned my cornfield into a classroom for the entire planet. As the Montana sun began to set, casting golden light across the enclosure, Leo and Luna settled together beneath their favorite oak tree, a direct descendant of the tree where Jake had first heard their distressed calls. They groomed each other with the same gentle care they'd shown as frightened cubs, their bond unbroken by time or the transformation from terrified refugees to confident ambassadors for their kind. Dr. Hawthorne was already planning the next phase of the facility's expansion, incorporating lessons learned from Leo and Luna's care into programs for other genetically unique animals. The center had become a model for ethical wildlife conservation, proving that scientific research and compassionate animal care could work in harmony. Jake pulled out his phone and captured a final photo of the cubs in the evening light. Tomorrow, he would return to Iowa, to his corn and cattle, to the practical rhythms of farm life. But part of him would always remain connected to these remarkable animals, whose survival had depended on a farmer's willingness to care about creatures that didn't belong in his world. The story of Leo and Luna had become more than a tale of rescue and recovery. It was proof that conservation succeeds when ordinary people make extraordinary choices, when scientific discovery serves the welfare of individual animals, and when the bonds between species transcend the boundaries humans try to impose on the natural world. As Jake walked back to his truck, Leo's evening roar echoed across the Montana wilderness, a sound of contentment and strength that carried the promise of a future where such magnificent creatures could thrive, protected by the knowledge their existence had made possible. Thank you for joining us for this incredible true story of discovery, survival, and the unbreakable bonds that connect all living creatures. If Leo and Luna's journey moved you as much as it moved us, please subscribe to our channel for more amazing wildlife stories that showcase the resilience of nature and the power of human compassion. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to never miss stories of hope, discovery, and the remarkable animals that share our world. Together, we can ensure that stories like Leo and Luna's continue to inspire conservation efforts and protect the magnificent creatures that make our planet extraordinary. What would you have done if you'd found these incredible cubs in your backyard? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if you believe in the power of ordinary people to make an extraordinary difference for wildlife.